Go.
Or tie in honor of the city
As in
manager.
misdirection.
All right, I'd like to call this study session of Lakewood City Council for Monday, October 26th to order. The first item of business is a joint meeting with the Lakewood Promise Advisory Board. And if everything's working, we have Dr. Joyce Loveday and Ellie Wilson and perhaps some other members of the committee on board.
I think Ellie might be getting in at this moment.
Hey, Joyce.
Hi.
Geez, we have all the higher education firepower for miles around on board.
Yeah.
Okay, are we on?
Yes.
You're
Yes.
You're up, Ellie.
Okay, because this is my first time. I'm flying by the seat of my pants here. So good evening, Mayor Anderson and Deputy Mayor Whalen and the council members. My name is Ellie Wilson and I'm the chairperson of the Promise Advisory Board this year. Joyce Loveday, Dr. Joyce Loveday is with me. Andy Gernon was going to join us, but she declined because she's not feeling well tonight. But we're lucky to have her still actively participating in our community. Mary Dodsworth and Brian Humphreys should be here as well. So I'll just go ahead and begin with what we have been doing. In 2019, Lakewood's Promise has established an ambitious work program for 2020. And as is certainly the case for everyone, COVID-19 has disrupted a lot of what we had planned to do. But we did adjust and we have managed to achieve some significant outcomes. Tonight, of course, our goal is to update you on our progress. You may recall, of course, that the Promise vision is that Lakewood is a community where all children and youth will be able to work toward their full potential. And we spent much of 2019 coming to realize that achieving this vision could not be done by direct services anymore with our youth and our children, although we know how critical that is. However, we know also that families and communities must also thrive if they're going to support our children and our youth to reach their full potential. So we decided that our work plan has to be based on complementing the bigger picture, what the city is doing this year. Therefore, our three main efforts are as forward. Number one, we needed to think about a direct process of adding a workforce development component to the city's work. Number two, address the issue of youth mental health. And number three, to develop a more productive format for the monthly collaboration meetings. Our Vice Chair, Dr. Joyce Loveday, is going to provide a summary of the progress that we have made this year. Joyce?
All right, thank you, Ellie. I also want to note that Leanna Christian is joining us from the Lakewood's Promise and Dr. Michelle Johnson. So thank you both for being here as well. All right. So the 2020 work plan, I know, was included in your agenda packet, and it included information regarding both what was accomplished during some of our meetings, as well as what our work plan has been. So some of the things included are establishing a workforce development work group and initiative, establishing a tentative youth mental health initiative with the school district, although that's currently on hold because of our circumstances around COVID. We also focused on moving the monthly community collaboration online and using it to monitor the effects of COVID-19 on Lakewood's children, youth, and families. Also, we have focused on influencing the human services priorities for CARES Act funding and collaborating with the Community Services Advisory Board to make a joint recommendation for general fund human services funding areas. So first, to talk just a little bit about the Workforce Development and Work Group Initiative. Work around this began just about a year ago when Dr. Julie White, the president of Pierce College Fort Steilacoom, and I met with Council Member Whalen about increasing the presence and awareness of higher education opportunities within our Lakewood community. At that time, Mr. Whalen suggested that Lakewood's Promise would be a great place for these ideas to be further considered, and that's exactly what we did. We brought the idea to Lakewood's Promise in January 2020 and have since been working with the Human Services Coordinator, Brian Humphreys, and others from our colleges to share ideas and begin moving some ideas forward. Brian has helped facilitate monthly meetings to gather data about which training programs we want to begin with as a pilot to focus marketing and our communication within the Lakewood area. And our intent has been to identify in-demand fields that would reliably equip workers with living wage jobs. Based on that information, we have been working to provide alumni names and information to Brian, and he has been making connections with them and doing some recordings about these training programs and those who are working in the field to try and catch people's attention and help them realize that they too can be looking at opportunities to enhance their life and work. The Human Services Coordinator is currently conducting interviews over Zoom with several alumni to create promotional videos about those training programs as a pilot effort to raise awareness about these jobs and training pathways. One question that will influence our work in 2021 is who we might partner with to keep this work going after this initial pilot because of the limited capacity within the Promise Board, and we do want to help further that along. This conversation about workforce development is also evolving into one about growing the footprint of the Center for Strong Families, which we have one in the Lakewood area. It's located on the campus of Lakewood's Clover Park Technical College. The Center for Strong Families is a program established through the United Way to support individuals in high-need communities with financial coaching, workforce preparation, and support services. So the Center for Strong Families program, located on CPTC's Lakewood campus, is intended to help strengthen the financial futures, not only of our students, but of the residents of the city of Lakewood by providing accredited financial counseling. Though initially focused on helping our students understand the important role personal finance will make in their lives after graduation and providing the one-on-one access to an accredited financial counselor, the center is now hoping to take a broader role in serving the Lakewood community. And through this work, the center focuses on helping individuals understand things such as the importance of budgeting, the role of FICO scores and credit reports, developing strategies for successful short-term and long-term savings goals, and providing the introduction to beginner investment for retirement. Financial coaching is one of those ways to help households use what resources they do have to minimize the risk of homelessness and housing insecurity. Early in the year, the school district presented a youth mental health plan to the Promise Board, and our commitment to them was to help make this plan a community-wide initiative. The school district has obviously been preoccupied with adapting to COVID-19, so that's something that we're going to wait and revisit again in 2021. The community collaboration has been meeting via Zoom since April. We've gathered useful perspective from the community about what's happening at the ground level, which informed the recommendations for how to use the CARES Act funding for human services. In late 2019, the Lakewood's Promise Board oversaw the Human Services Coordinator's Community Needs Survey and data gathering, which culminated in a draft 2020 community needs report. That has since been tabled when COVID-19 hit because it was unclear whether the data and narrative would still be relevant. That's now being updated with a COVID-19 update included, and we will make that available to you as soon as it's ready. Many of the issues we've been dealing with this year will carry over into 2021. Workforce development, financial coaching, and youth mental health are critical areas that require strategic initiatives. However, we will continue to leverage our partners and the community collaboration to remain vigilant. The severity of COVID-19 itself and the ongoing effects to the economy, the challenges of remote learning, however long it lasts, and the end of the eviction moratorium are issues we're keeping a particularly close eye on. One common theme of all our work is the need to raise awareness. These are the resources in the community. Or there are resources in the community. There are training programs that lead to living wage jobs and grants to pay for training. And there's already a Center for Strong Families on our campus. There are employers looking for workers. The rental market is changing, etc. We're all talking about what it would look like for Lakewood's Promise to increase its communications capacity through the city around these areas. So Ellie, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks a lot, Joyce. Lots of good information. To add to that, I have gone ahead and reached out to many of our faith communities over the last 4 weeks. I have touched base with 8 of them so far, and all 8 of them are ready and looking forward to being a part of our collaboration. I think that there is a possibility for some of those resources that we're looking for to be found throughout some of our faith communities. So I'm looking forward to touching bases with several others that I haven't made contact with yet. And I am excited to have this component part of Promise and the collaboration. So I thank the council very much for supporting Promise and for giving us the financial support as well. And right now, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you all may have.
Questions from council? Mr. Whalen.
I have a comment and a question. Joyce, thank you for your comments, and Ellie, your work as well. I want to comment and ask a question on the workforce development portion of the topic tonight. I really enjoyed meeting with both you and Julie when we sat down together and had lunch, because it planted a seed of a conversation that hopefully will develop and blossom into something pretty dramatic. And I think that is the issue of how we better connect workforce development through the incredible work you guys do in the community and technical colleges with workforce needs as identified through our economic development departments, both at the city and the county, and through the economic development board that I chaired in 2019 when we met. I know that the current chair and the incoming chair, who is a Lakewood resident, Herb Simon, is very interested in this concept of how do we help address the connection between students who want good jobs and the employment community is looking for well-trained students. And so I think to plant the seed, there is an opportunity where the business community might well generate some funds as part of the EDB's work plan to have a little bit of a scholarship fund. It might start small, but it might grow, because this is the interconnection between the community and technical colleges, the mentorship piece, and the business community. We want well-trained students, and students want good paying jobs. And this is a great opportunity for us to marry that together and to further that conversation. So I'm committing to you to meet again. I'll pay for lunch so we can bring Herb along board as the incoming chair and further this conversation, because we can get help to those students who have need and desire to be trained in those jobs of the future that will be, you know, what the business community is looking for. So I appreciate the initial conversation, but let's further it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that some good things lie ahead, and I really appreciate your commitment to it.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah.
Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the liaison to the Promise Board, I just want to echo what Deputy Mayor Whalen had just said. I think it's a great opportunity, and Brian is doing a fantastic job, and rest everybody that is reaching out and tapping into the possible resources that we can connect with. They're doing a great job, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I have a question regarding one of the other points that you were alluding to was youth mental health. I think we see things in the media that youth mental health issues are exacerbated by COVID. There's a limited amount of resources. There are any number of jobs programs that come and go, and finding ones that work and that you can link up with is an issue in of itself, but at least there's kind of consistent funding and assets there. What do we have in Lakewood, or what do we, with respect to youth mental health assets, and how do we go about enhancing those and making them available?
Brian, would you like to address that, or who would like to take that one on?
Do one of you want to talk about 3 to Succeed just for a second, or do you want me to do that?
Yes, please.
So I'll just tell you that what the school district and Ron is excited about is something called 3 to Succeed, a model based out of Virginia that's highly effective in helping with youth mental health. And it has to do with training the community to use certain language and making sure students have mentorship opportunities and they have purpose in their lives and they're on track for living wage jobs. It's a great model. The school district was going to adapt it for the school district itself. And that's why our goal was to say, well, that's going to be great in the schools. We should do that throughout the community. So we're going to help them bring that out to the community. Our youth serving organizations are doing a fantastic job of continuing to provide programming for youth to maintain their mental health. And we actually had a meeting with youth serving organizations very early in the workforce development process to say, this is not just about adults getting workforce living wage jobs. This is also about youth being on track to get a living wage job and building that college going culture. And so we met with youth and said, as we're doing communications and providing actionable information to the community, how do we communicate in a way to youth that resonates with them? And I made the stupid comment of like TikTok, and they said, nope, face-to-face trust building relationships is all that works for youth. And so those conversations with the youth serving organizations directed how we're doing workforce development.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council, comments? Ms. Farmer.
I'm curious if you've talked about or explored a connection to the state's workforce development councils and some of the other work going on at the state level.
Yes, well, I would say that is a natural part of the work that we do at both Pierce and Clover Park. We're very closely involved with the Workforce Development Council and our workforce arenas. I mean, they're just pretty intimately involved, always looking at funding opportunities together, always looking at training opportunities together. And so, though it has not been necessarily a part of this specific conversation, it is integrated within that work based on the connections with the colleges.
Thank you.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I certainly appreciate the Promise Board being here with us this evening to be able to go and do that. Just because of my history, I have a great affinity towards the workforce development piece, and I know that getting programs launched and then going from successful pilot to sustained program is a point where programs get challenged because there are people who like to fund pilots but then want to move on to the next pilot, and you have to work on that. So I'm glad you're thinking both short and long term going forward, and certainly we should commit as a city to helping in that effort to where we can be the catalyst for other partners to join and stay linked. But I had a question regarding youth mental health, or at least youth survival in the COVID environment. It really seems that there's an awful lot of messaging to youth about what they can't do or shouldn't do, and perhaps not enough about trying to get things to them about what they can and how they can go about having the social interactions that are important to young people to be able to move forward. And I'm glad to hear that we're dealing with activities, although I don't know how they are, and that perhaps there's a need to look at a communications plan or some communications tools to communicate with youth and young people about COVID-19, because I think many of them are getting their information from the news media and very official type things, and those are mediums that are targeted at adults, and maybe it's hard to get those messages to resonate in a way that sticks with folks there. And so I guess I would ask the board to consider whether there's perhaps with the youth council or something, of whether there's a COVID-19 youth blog or some tool that the youth would tell us would be something that they would engage in and could in fact help spread information, accurate information that would actually have its attention paid to it by young people to do that. But anyway, I am really appreciative of the flexibility that this group has had to adjust to the realities of 2020 based on what they thought 2020 was going to be in 2019. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, anyone else? Ms. Wilson.
Yes, a couple of things have crossed my mind. I would like some feedback from our youth council on our topics that we have talked about tonight, mental health and job training, particularly from seniors in our high schools. And secondly, what role does our Chamber of Commerce play in the things that we have been talking about?
Good issues. Mr. Bulkey.
Yeah, I can answer. I mean, at our first youth council meeting of the year, when they introduced themselves and they talked about issues that were important to them, it was really incredibly consistent, and it involved social justice issues and mental health. And mental health has been a recurring theme through the last couple of years, pretty strongly over the last couple of years, and it has not gone away and doesn't show any signs. And I know as a council, we've had some discussions surrounding improvements in mental health in our community. And they did not mention job training, but it would be a good thing to ask them. I think most of the kids, if not all of them, on the youth council are probably thinking, are planning to go to college of some sort. They tend to be higher performing kids, and that's not a negative, and that's the wrong thing to say, I think, but they tend to be kids, from my experience with them, that are on track to go to college. They have not, whether they have not been introduced to the idea of going into the trades or some other kind of thing, but I think it would be important to ask them, because they probably know a lot of folks who may be interested in that. A lot of times they have family members who are looking for opportunities, and I think a lot of times when they talk about what their plans are, it's a reflection of what they're being told at the school level. And so all the things you talk about going into the trades are things that in some cases they might have been introduced to. I don't know that. In all fairness, I don't know that. But mental health is definitely at the top of the agenda for them. They see a lot of issues, and they see a lack of resources within the schools. They're it's pretty thin, is what I'm understanding from them.
Mhm.
And,
Well,
and I would just like to take a moment and emphasize that workforce development and workforce education is a lot more than the trades. It's nursing, it's engineering, it's environmental sciences, and you get that at both Clover Park, and you get that at Pierce College. And it's a great place to get started in education. And I know oftentimes we are looked at as just the trades, but it's more. Yeah. Dr. Johnson, I think, has a
Good
couple
evening.
comments she'd
Hi,
like to make.
Michelle Johnson from Pierce
Hey,
College.
Michelle.
It's great to see all of you.
good to see you too.
I just want to comment about a couple of pieces, put a couple of things together that you've talked about. So I think about Deputy Mayor Whalen's idea of getting the business community to help fund individuals, and Joyce's comments about what professional, technical, and workforce education is. You know, we are the community technical college system is very much into what we're calling guided pathways. And so think about these as career pathways, large areas of thinking about careers and career progression. So whether that starts on a certificate or degree, and whether that's in the trades or in some other industry, what we're trying to do together is create a pathway for those students, a good starting point, and then a place as throughput. In addition, one of the things that just went into effect in July, and of course COVID has impacted us in every way, has been the legislature's investment in the Washington College Grant. And the Washington College Grant replaces the state need grant. And so in the state need grant, those individuals who are low income can apply for this additional money. They usually at the federal level, they get Pell, but at the state level, they can get the state need grant. The challenge with that is about 26,000 individuals who actually qualified for it didn't get it because it was a first come, first serve. And so in this last legislative session, what happened is that they funded the Washington College Grant, which now allows individuals at the 150% of the poverty level can actually have tuition paid for. And so these students, and we have to get this information to students. And so whether they're the youth and their adults who also could be eligible to go to school right along with them, has the eligibility of this money. So if you think about that, if you think about those who may or may not be eligible for Pell, because this Washington College Grant is a guarantee. So it's a grant program, not a first come, first serve. And then you tie that with the resource that the businesses may provide, because for many of the students, the books and the other kinds of expenses that go beyond the tuition that would be covered by the Washington College Grant could be a great partnership. And so often, you know, the programs that we're doing together, Clover Park and Pierce and our other Bates and Tacoma, we work together on this. And so we're trying to work back to the school district as well, so that they can see clear patterns of career choices in large areas, whether that's allied health, you know, science, technology, and math, you know, whether it's nursing, business, education, and all of the trades and all the technology pieces, that we're trying to make sure there's clear pathways. So we're excited about doing this work together, you know, with the city. And there's so many with the collaboration, relationships being built that we would love to see this really take hold and begin to advertise together the colleges and the opportunities. Because, you know, the Washington Roundtable says that in the next 5 years, 70% of the jobs are going to need some post-secondary education. And right now, only 35% of adults in Pierce County have something beyond high school. So think about that. Think about what's happening if we're not getting our young people. And it's only about 50% of students within the first 5 years are actually going on to post-secondary education. So we've got a big job to do together. And so, you know, we're in it, and we hope you are too. So thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank
you. Mr. Branstetter.
Hey, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Johnson, thank you for your comments. And we recently worked on our initial draft of our legislative proposals for this coming biennium. And the Washington College grant, you mentioned it was created in the past, most recent legislative session. But is funding for that secure, or is there a legislative action that needs to be encouraged in this biennium?
It is part of a service fee that was an occupational tax that was tied to certain service industries, and that's what's paying for it. Right now, it's a little behind because of the economy, but the legislature can go ahead and fund a dedicated program for one biennium. So in the coming biennium, yeah, it's probably going to be okay because they can use general tax dollars. But after that, it could be at risk. And so not only the Washington College grant, the guided pathways, and some other funding for our faculty in high demand careers like nursing and those kinds of programs where it's really hard for us to get faculty, it funds that. But it's running a little bit short right now. But they do have legally they can carry it for one biennium, and then after that there would be a reduction. And I think that honestly they would reduce the funding to our system and keep the Washington College grant as the last piece. So good news for students. It's harder for us then to have the actual programs that will be accessible, but I think we'll be good in the coming biennium. But we would like you to push it and make sure that it continues to be funded as a priority, because it comes out of the Washington Student Achievement Council. That doesn't come through the community and technical college system. That money comes out of the Student Achievement Council.
Well, we can perhaps look if there is a way to at least mention it in our policy manual that we share with legislators.
So I see some hope in the pathways elements to this, and I'd like to kind of make a disclaimer so this doesn't sound like too negative a comment. I'm a super believer in education. When my father was in college about 1950, from a mill workers family, there were 3 paths in town. You went to jail, you followed your father into the mill, or you went to college. Only 7% of the US population had a college degree. 25 years later, when I graduated, I was the first college graduate on my mother's family ever, and the last for another 30 years until my kids went. It was 15%. Now it's 35%. And employers are starting to erase the requirement for a college degree on many employment applications. And the reason for that is that there are so many degrees without a pathway to prosperity. They're a pathway to student debt, but not to meaningful work and prosperity for the recipient of the degree. So looking at it from a broader perspective, going back to high school and helping people find a path in life, even if it's one for 6 or 10 years, because they're going to change a number of times, giving them the tools they need to be adaptable, the tools they need to be prosperous, instead of just what's becoming a hollow message is go to college, it'll all be better when you get out the other end, is really important. But then again, although I nominally have a liberal arts degree, I was a business major, so I went to trade school. But I see it as very important to get that pathways with a purpose down, even if you have to jump the track and go a different way along the line. Any other questions or comments from council? Well, we appreciate all you do. You're an extremely well, I would say well endowed with skills that are really bring a lot to the table for a city committee, especially at what we pay you. And we would hope that this COVID environment doesn't derail you along the way.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for all you do.
Thank you for listening to us.
Great.
Thank you for supporting us.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice seeing you all in person.
One of these days soon, I hope.
Yeah.
When we move to Police Chief Commendation Awards with Chief Sorrow.
Mayor Anderson and council members, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you, but the picture went away.
How about now?
Yes,
Okay.
all's good.
This is, it's a little bit overdue. I think COVID has thrown a monkey wrench into a lot of things, to include our award schedule. But we are able to present two groups of officers with awards tonight. The first group I'm going to have come up is Sergeant Pete Johnson, Officer Melody Wright, and Officer Jared Pingle. On June 28th of this year, Sergeant Johnson was working off duty at the Pierce Transit Park and Ride when he heard several gunshots come from the Wendy's that's just right across the street. He looks up and sees who ends up being the victim of the shooting, running at him saying somebody's trying to kill him. Sergeant Johnson gets out, gets this person to safety and into a safe location, not knowing where the person is with the gun, and starts rendering medical aid and asks for other units. Officer Wright and Officer Pingle arrive quickly and help apply medical aid, and to include a tourniquet to stop bleeding from his femoral artery. There is no doubt that this person would not have survived his injuries or his wounds were it not for the quick thinking of Sergeant Johnson and Officers Wright and Pingle. For their efforts, they're each receiving the life-saving award. And I am pleased to say that he's still struggling with his injuries, but the victim is alive and progressing, I should say. So with that, I'll present the life-saving awards to our three recipients: Pete Johnson, thanks, sir. Jared Pingle, and Melody Wright. And we can do a quick camera clap. Thank you all. Thank you. The next group I have to come up is Officer Vince Savanchio, Officer Jacob Vinker, and Reserve Officer Travis Smith. All right, so this award goes way back to May 11th of 2020, when all three officers responded to an apartment that was fully engulfed in fire. And this is an occupied apartment building in a very busy part of town in Springbrook. The officers, upon arrival and seeing that the building was fully engulfed and that there were people needing to be evacuated, ran quickly up to the apartments, knocked on doors, got people out, got them to safety, all, while the fire was raging around them. In addition, Officer Savanchio, who was the acting supervisor that night, coordinated resources coming in and got fire there, got set up for the fire department so they had what they needed when they arrived. So again, just great acts of heroism that I'm sure nobody saw on the news, and it's one of those things that happen, unfortunately too frequently. We just don't hear about them. So I am proud to be able to highlight their efforts. And for their efforts, they're each receiving the Medal of Distinguished Service. Reserve Officer Travis Smith, who you can tell is his daytime job is as a West Pierce firefighter. So he cheated a little bit. Officer Jacob Vinker. Thanks, sir. And Officer Svankio for his efforts in leading the team received the police chief's commendation. Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all. Those are our two groups of awards. I appreciate you allowing us a few minutes, even in these unusual circumstances, but that's what we have. Thank you, and I think I'm up next. I'm going to dip into my office and do that one there. So I will see you in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. No, thank you.
So we're transitioning. It seems that now West Pierce firefighters are reserve police officers, so they can get to the scene quicker. So we're going to move to a review of the third quarter 2020 police report with Chief Zarro. Back to you. Let's get the sound up.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so here we are with our third quarter report and some different statistical things to present, but a lot of good police work going on as well that I think is worth highlighting. So advancing one slide, please tell me if you don't see them advance, but the total calls for service were certainly down from the third quarter of last year.
We don't have a screen share yet, Chief.
Oh, you don't? Sorry, 1 second.
There you go.
Okay. Now, are you looking at the calls for service number? Thank you. A lot of things are down, obviously. I think a lot of the arrests are down, and I think we can attribute a lot of that to COVID. It's not like we aren't stopping people or catching people. It's just that we're not able to book them. So some positive things that we saw, certainly I think the one that I was most pleased to see was the reduction from the second quarter in aggravated assaults. You've heard me talk a lot about gun crimes and assaults involving firearms, and that reduction that's what's reflected here. Primarily, aggravated assaults are assaults involving a weapon and a lot of times a firearm. One number that stands out that's higher is the increase in motor vehicle thefts. And you can see they are from last quarter up 5.43%. But if you compare it to last year, the year to date last year, it's up 48%. And I'll talk more about that at the end. I think you've heard me talk before about property crimes and what contributes to those. And I'll cover that specifically later on in the presentation. And we've seen these before, the crimes against population per district, per policing district. And it's fairly consistent that District 4, driven largely by property crimes, and that is where you have your business districts. That's where, and your large parking lots where the cars get stolen. That's where it's, I think, the most disproportionate for the population of the district. So persons crimes, this is, I think we talked last time about the little spike that we typically see in the second quarter. And we were hoping to see that dip after the second quarter like we normally see, and we did. So we're down to 395 incidents, and that's, again, significantly low when you look at it historically. And it's, largely, the decrease is largely driven by our reduction in aggravated assaults, which But again, you've all heard me talk about that before, so I'm happy to say that we have seen a reduction there. Western State Hospital, I know that it's always on a lot of radars, and we hear a lot about it. So I do think it's important to note when they're trending downward as well. And here you can see the lowest quarter going back to the first quarter of 2017. And I've talked before about this too, that the numbers you might see reported to L&I are different than the numbers you'd see reported to us as a crime. While you might hear something reported in the news about a higher assault number than what you're seeing here, this is based on actual reports that are filed with us. Now, property crime by quarter, again, we are seeing a spike here, and this is largely driven by vehicle theft and vandalism of all things. But when we talk about vandalism, that's exactly what it sounds like, is damage to property. That can be graffiti. What I think we're seeing, without going through and looking at all the reports, is vehicle prowls. I think people, if they see come back to their car and a window's broken out, that can oftentimes get reported as a vandalism as opposed to a vehicle prowl, because they don't know that if anybody got in, or it could be that it was reported online and that's the report title that the victim thought was most appropriate. But at any rate, it's vandalisms and vehicle thefts that are really driving this property crime spike. And society crimes by quarter, we talked before, I think last time, about in the second quarter, because society crimes are so proactively driven, where investigations are initiated by officers and then followed up with further investigation. It doesn't start typically with a call to 911. When we were in the middle of the big shutdown for COVID, that's where our proactive efforts were restricted the most, and you saw that reflected in the second quarter numbers. But as those restrictions lifted, we were able to get back to doing some more proactive work, and you saw that in the third quarter. And I think highlighted by, actually that might have been after October, but I think you all saw the investigation here in Lakewood that culminated with the seizure of several pounds of methamphetamine and heroin, a significant amount of cash, and firearms. Some just fantastic investigations and police work that is started because of their proactivity and developing leads. So here's where we look at the total crime by quarter, and it's you might see, if you could draw a trend line, or if I could draw a trend line, a slight reduction from the second quarter of 17 through the third quarter of 20. But keep in mind that our total crime rate is driven by property crimes. So that's where we can look and see some of the trends contributing to our total crime. And here what we're seeing is the increase in property crimes based on vehicle thefts and vandalism and other frauds. That's where we saw the increase. Now, here is some good news. And I showed a similar slide to this last time, using the second quarter year-to-date comparison for every year going back. So this is a third quarter year-to-date for every year going back to 2015. Now it's kind of interesting. Each quarter has their own sort of personality. We talked about the second quarter for persons crimes creating kind of a spike, and each quarter sort of has their own contributing factors that lend to their crime rates, be it weather or coinciding with the school years or things like that. So I do think that comparing year to date by quarter can be kind of telling as to where we're at. You can see here, this is a very positive trend for us. Going back to 2015, it's the lowest third quarter year to date. Since in the last 5 years. So moving on to accidents, I think what we're seeing here with this spike, in the second quarter, there weren't a lot of people out on the roads. So now what we're seeing is a lot more people out on the roads than we saw in the second quarter, with maybe a lot of pent up frustration and people not paying as much attention or driving faster than they should. But what I think is contributing to the collisions. However, if you look, it's still a downward trend. If you taken together from the first quarter of 2018 at the beginning of this chart. Yeah, there's a lot to read. I'm not going to read through it, but just a little bit of discussion about some critical incidents that we had. We did have a homicide recently at the end of September, and I know that you were all made aware of this. Very tragic 17-year-old who was at a party with some family members and was mistaken for somebody else, we believe, and either that or it was random. And he was shot and later died of his injuries. This was very much a whodunit, and detectives worked tirelessly and were able to identify the suspect, the vehicles involved, and there's currently the suspect is in jail awaiting trial. We had a fatality collision. I don't want to say thankfully, but it was a one-car versus pole where the only fatality was the driver. And we do have evidence that they were racing, or he was racing with another vehicle. And that is something that we're seeing more and more of, it seems in the past, over the past year, are vehicles racing, driving at excessive speeds. And I'd say it's likely, or some of it's due to the lowered traffic or less traffic on the roadways. But again, very sad outcome. It was a young man in the military who had a wife and children, and he's gone after this one collision. We did have 2 officer-involved shooting investigations with Tacoma that took up a lot of our time. One we did as mutual aid, and the other we did, it was the first one done under the umbrella of the Pierce County Force Investigation Team, which isn't completed as far as being stood up, but was stood up enough, and we had enough participation from our partner agencies that we were able to use that as our first investigation. And I talked about our crimes against persons. Crimes against property, when we get into that, is driven largely by vehicle thefts. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But one thing that's kind of an interesting note is 9 of the vehicle thefts were from one incident. I don't know how many of you realize this, but there's a big Connex over by Pierce College that has a bunch of motorcycles in it. That's a motorcycle instruction school uses for teaching to certify folks for their driver's license. And they just keep the motorcycles in there all the time. They use the parking lot. Well, somebody knew or figured out that there was a bunch of motorcycles in there, and they broke in and stole 9 of them. So while that's reported as 9 different vehicle thefts, it's really one incident. Now, again, looking just at motor vehicle thefts, you can see the spike coming from the start of this year all the way up through the third quarter. And really, it is about, I think, the jail restrictions. And, I've talked before about how just a few people can cause a tremendous amount of crime, property crimes. That's what we saw here as well. The Pierce County Auto Theft Task Force, who's supervised by our own Sergeant Carroll, and we also have a detective on there, Todd Jordan. They actually arrested 5 people in the third quarter who accounted for at least 80 vehicle thefts along the I-5 corridor in different jurisdictions. Now, one of those suspects confessed to being responsible for over 250 vehicle thefts in 18 months. Now, this really drives the point home that I've tried to make, that it's not, they're not, thousands of people out there committing property crimes. It's really a handful of people. And it's important that when we get our hands on them, we're able to put them in jail and get them, away from where they're committing their crimes. The restrictions due to COVID, though, have made that very challenging. The one suspect actually was stopped multiple times in stolen cars and had to be let go. And they, to nobody's surprise, went out and stole more cars. Now, while they're working along the I-5 corridor, we did look at what maybe a connection was to Lakewood, and it turns out 3 of the 5, and they're loosely affiliated, all of them are, but at least 3 of them lived very nearby, lived out in Arrowhead. So they were traveling through Lakewood all the time to get to I-5 and get to other parts of the I-5 corridor where they would commit these thefts. So along the way, they would steal cars in Lakewood. So a very active group that was stopped and arrested, or caught and arrested by the Puget Sound Auto Theft Task Force. So we will hopefully see a positive impact on our vehicle theft numbers next quarter. And they are still currently in jail awaiting trial. And some of that had to do with just talking and working with the Pierce County Jail and the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office to make sure, 1, that the jail would hold them, and 2, that the prosecutor's office would be able to prosecute them. So we got to where we needed to be, and that's where they're at now. Now, that's the end of the formal presentation. The one thing that I wanted to add, mostly because it's fresh in my mind, is an incident we had this morning involving SRT. It was a homicide suspect from Snohomish County that was in an apartment in Woodbrook, and a person that's living there realized what he had done and actually called and reported him. Our special response team responded, and we were able to, after even trying to get them to negotiate and talk to us for about 5 hours, we're able to gain some compliance without having to enter the apartment, but using the tools that were available to them to, let's say, get their attention and get them to come out and surrender peacefully. I listened to the whole thing on the radio. I wasn't on scene, but it was an absolutely outstanding bit of tactical police work that resulted in the arrest of a murder suspect and his friend, who had also had a warrant for escape from community custody through the Department of Corrections. So a tremendous amount of good police work going on, and it's reflected in some of the charts that you're seeing, and some of the crime rates that we're seeing, as if we look historically, are certainly going in the right direction. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Questions for the chief? Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, thank you for your report. I have a couple of comments and then a question. One of the things that I wanted to pass on to you is that the comments that I'm hearing from the citizens, and then I appreciate as well, is the fact that you guys are able to capture some of the bad guys rather fast. So that's being noticed and appreciated. My question is the Honda still the #1 stolen car, or have the trucks taken over?
The last numbers I saw, which was only within the last 6 months, the Hondas are still holding their place at #1, and not just any. It's still the late '90s Hondas. So if you're driving one of those, you're top of the list.
The trucks are not as bad as it sounds, then, huh?
No, there are. In fact, one of those 5 people, his favorite target is a Ford truck. So the trucks are popular too, but I guess nothing beats a classic.
Yeah. Thank you.
See. Could you unshare the screen, Chief?
Yeah, let me try that here.
Then I can see if
there we go.
Is in their hand. Mr. Whalen.
Thank you. Chief, thanks for the report. Had a question on the time frame in which some of the guys were being circulated through the process, not being retained in the jail. The COVID restrictions, are those lightened up now so we can actually get people booked and retained pending trial better than we used to?
A little bit better than we used to. There's the Pierce County Jail will listen to arguments, or will if we have somebody that there's a special case that we really think should be booked, we can call and talk to a lieutenant and make that case. The decision is still theirs, and I want to make it clear, I don't fault them for the decisions they're having to make regarding keeping their confined space safe. But it is loosening a little bit. And Nisqually as well. There's, we're able to get misdemeanors in there.
That was going to be my question on some of these folks. Arguably, they're felony arrests, right? And so would they have to go to the county as opposed to us taking them to Nisqually or Fife or wherever else we might be able to book them?
If we want to book them, and Fife doesn't have a jail anymore, but if we want to book them on the felony, yes, they would have to go to Pierce County. But what we can do, if there's a misdemeanor and a felony charge, we can book them on the misdemeanor and just refer for the felony.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was just going to ask a broader question. I listened to the candidates for the sheriff position recently, and there was some comment about the sheriff's or the jail has about capacity for 1,200, and it's got about 600 now, and part of it's all COVID related. Is that our experience? The limitations on the use of the jail?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's the COVID restrictions on the Pierce County Jail are have definitely restricted our bookings and how many of the arrestees we can book as opposed to just let walk away.
So how do we then triage those bookings? I mean, an auto theft is one thing. Somebody who may be having a greater felony, a crime against person, may be more dangerous to let loose. So how are we juggling those decisions vis-a-vis the space that we can take folks to?
Well, we, a lot of times the people that we arrest are people that we've arrested before. And if it's the repeat folks, even with property crimes, those are the ones that will call the jail and say, look, this person's wearing us out. We need to do something. But if it's somebody that committed a violent felony, the jail is still going to take them.
Okay, good.
So it's the real violent folks that are a threat to public safety.
Right.
We're still getting into the Pierce County Jail. It's, I think, the kind of the window there where we're not are the people that we catch in a stolen car who with a firearm, and either the firearm's either stolen or they're not supposed to have one.
Right.
Those are the ones that used to be an automatic trip to jail that now we're having to let walk a lot of times.
How about the felony drug guys that are distributing stuff that they shouldn't be distributing?
If it's distribution, that's one thing. Possession, no.
Right.
But that's, again, we can call if there's a special case for some reason, we can call the jail and make an argument.
The reason why I ask is I recall that we all sat through the Prosecutor Lindquist's presentation, I don't know, a year or two or maybe 3 ago now, about these repeat offenders, the frequent flyers. And there was some value in making sure that they got special enhanced treatment, if you will. And I'm just curious as to whether or not that's holding true now, even whether it comes property crime or whatever else, right?
Right. Well, I can't speak for the prosecutor. I know they've had a pretty good backlog and just trying to get court cases through. I think court is just now starting to open up. So it's not necessarily just the prosecutor. It's also the courts not being able to hold court because of COVID restrictions. But we're still, when we get the repeat folks, we are still able to call and work with the jails and sometimes get them booked. But we do have to have that communication. And like we saw with the folks arrested by the Auto Theft Task Force, we have to work with the prosecutor's office and the jails to make sure that everybody's on board.
Got it. Okay. Well, good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Chief, have you received any mobile booking equipment from Pierce County?
Mobile booking equipment? No, I haven't had that conversation with Chief Jackson in a while. I know she was working on it, but we haven't received any yet.
Yeah, I'm of the impression that it arrived, so they were going to have to place it. So,
oh, okay.
We had like 4 or 5 units. I forget exactly what it was.
Okay, I'll reach out to Chief Jackson and see what they've got going.
looking at the Western State Hospital statistics, and given our long time skepticism of lack of regarding their transparency, to what extent do you think that drop might be attributable to failure to report? It seems pretty dramatic, while the news reports of injuries to staff and the staff's complaints have remained fairly consistent.
Right.
Do we have any
Well,
insight as to facts that would validate the rapid drop in cases?
Well, it's still the same process for reporting as it's always been to us. We have weekly meetings with the folks out on via Zoom, weekly meetings, and we still have, the same reporting process and everything else. There might be a change in reporting, but it would benefit them more to change their internal reporting than the reporting to us, because that's where they're getting hurt, is through the reporting to L&I. But honestly, I can't point to anything that concretely says, here's how we know they're 100% accurate. There might be some, changes in reporting practices internally, but it's been a trend as far as them dropping. I know that they had instituted some initiatives to reduce violence within the hospital. So they've made some efforts towards that end.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thanks for the update.
All right. Thank you all.
And tell your folks good work this morning. Nobody's hurt. Bad guys in jail.
That's correct.
Just the way you want it to.
Yep. Thank you. I will pass that on.
We've got to look to a review of the year-end 2020 budget adjustments with Ms. Krause.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I am going to share my screen. So before you is the 2020 year-end budget adjustment. I believe everything that is on this you have seen before. They have come before the City Council for approval as separate items. You've heard a lot about the COVID-19 grants, which are all listed here. And any other item has been addressed as part of the 2020 year-end estimate, or City Manager has highlighted them in his weekly report. But the purpose of this budget adjustment really is to incorporate items that the City Council had previously approved, appropriate projects that were funded by grants and contributions, and in some cases, the new allocations on an exception basis. It also includes one adjustment to the beginning balance, and that is for the CIP fund. We chose to record it to avoid any audit issues, and it was unanticipated revenues. So the budget adjustment, it does not make adjustments so that we tie back to the 2020 year-end budget adjustment or year-end numbers that you have seen in the 2021 and 2022 budget. But it still keeps all of those strategies that the City Manager has implemented in terms of cutting down on costs to balance the budget for 21 and 22. So the budget adjustment results in the ending fund balances. So for example, the general fund, we will end up with $8 million, and we had anticipated a little bit less, quite a bit less actually, as part of the 2020 year-end estimate. But best practices does not dictate that we adjust all of our revenues and expenditures to match what the year-end is. It is still a budget. So with the 2020 year-end estimate prepared as part of the 21 and 22 budget, we're anticipating a $5.8 million ending fund balance. And that's primarily from the drop in revenues, major revenues that we were anticipating, such as the sales tax and the gambling tax that would contribute to this, as well as admissions tax. As for the proposed budget adjustments, everything in the general fund has come before you. A large portion of it is the grants related to the CARES Act. We also have other grants from Department of Commerce. So we have the Comprehensive Plan, Energy and Climate Change, the entire list of the coronavirus relief funds that Tiffany has been updating you on. We also have the most recent one for the CARES Act facility safety improvements, which you've already seen. We've been receiving other grants as related to the emergency operations for the senior center, the emergency planning, and other COVID-19 grants, such as the Washington State Military Emergency Planning. We also have an increase in the choice contract. You approved this last year, or actually the year before, and they've just increased their the amount that they're allocating to the program, as well as the administrative cost. We recently purchased some property for the Springbrook Park, and we're allocating $212,000 to cover the cost of the property, as well as the negotiations. The real estate excise tax is making a transfer to the JBLM North Access Design Project. This is a project that you have approved and you had seen earlier this year, so we're just catching up and making the funds available. You've heard about the Transportation Benefit District and the Supreme Court's ruling. So we're estimating $835,000 coming in 2020, of which $195,000 is being allocated to the JBLM North Access Design. We have two adjustments for the seizure funds. One of them is the felony seizure. We've collected revenues of $41,000, and we're asking to appropriate that $41,000 that's been collected. And the uses are in accordance with what is allowed in the felony seizure fund. You've seen the boat purchase come before you. It originally was going to be purchased out of the Fleet and Equipment Fund using replacement reserves. Those replacement reserves will stay in the fund to be used for the 21 and 22 replacements, and seizure fund will pay for the purchase of the boat. And that is in accordance with what is authorized for using the federal seizure funds. We're also making an adjustment to the grant that we received from REPI funds for the North Clear Zone. That difference is about $47,000, and you can see that the total project cost is about $6.9 million in the different funding sources. Throughout the year, we receive various grants for public safety. This year, we're capturing the 3 grants that are currently not budgeted. They're for emergency planning, a supplemental grant related to the COVID-19, and our ongoing Washington Auto Theft Prevention Grant. For Parks Capital, we received $3,500 from the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation grant, and it's for improvements to American Lake Park. And so we've added it here to account for that mini grant. The Springbrook Park acquisition, you've seen that earlier. There was $184,000 for the property purchase and some negotiation fees. And so that's captured in this project here. The North JBLM access, the design portion was $2,345,000. And so we're transferring monies to cover that. And I have to make a correction as I'm seeing it here. We originally were going to transfer $743,000 from real estate excise tax, but we received a notification that the Supreme Court's ruling. And so instead of that, we put $195,000 coming from the TBD fund. So I'll make that correction for the public hearing. And that was a last minute change. For surface water management, we're transferring almost $122,000 for the JBLM portion, storm portion of the project for the JBLM North Access. And then just for housekeeping, the purchase of the police boat is now being purchased out of the seizure fund. So we're just removing it from the fleet and equipment. So as you can see, these budget adjustments, even though they are new, They primarily are housekeeping in nature in that we're capturing the revenues for those grants and the associated expenditures. So that concludes my presentation.
Questions for Ms. Kraus? Not seeing any hands raised. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now go to an Initiative 976 update with Mr. Caulfield.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, Council. Actually, I'm just going to turn this right back over to you just very quickly. Last week, I provided an update in terms of the recent actions by the Washington State Supreme Court, who ruled that I-976 is unconstitutional for two reasons. One is that it contained multiple subjects, and then also they ruled that it had a misleading ballot title. Also included in your packet this evening is a wide range of information in terms of the ordinance that this body has put in place in terms of projects to be funded with TBD revenues, as well as information from the 2021-22 proposed biennial budget message on a recommendation or some ideas on how the monies could be used since they are now available. However, this body wanted to have a discussion on some key policy issues. So again, this information that's in your packet is provided as background information, and between myself, the city attorney, and our assistant city manager for administrative services are here to answer any questions should you have that. But it's my understanding that you folks all wanted to have a discussion regarding next steps. So with that, Mayor, I turn it back to you.
Thank you. Council member comments. Mr. Whalen.
Well, I appreciate the information. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think during an upcoming discussion, we might have an opportunity to discuss the option 3 projects. May not be the precise list that we've got there, but it may be some combination. I think that would be helpful to kind of go through when we get a chance to do that. Is that correct, Mr. Caulfield? We can still kind of tweak that list if we would like.
Absolutely, Deputy Mayor. My recommendation is to wait until February to do that if that's what you wish to do. And the primary reason there is because by the end of January, we will have an understanding, generally speaking, of where we are with all of our grant applications, which I talked about last week.
Great. Okay, thank you. That would be my preference.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the fact that we're going to be able to conduct this review this evening. For myself, I think the primary reason why I think it's important for us to have this discussion and early is that this is one of those issues that in fact, because it was an initiative, involved the entire community or the voting members of the community having some sort of an opinion. And now I think that it's, we sort of owe them to do the same sort of due diligence that we did in response to the review of use of force policies, when that became earlier this year an area where the community was concerned about, well, what is it like in Lakewood? We're not like other folks, are we? And a variety of opinions. And we did go through we did go through a review that both satisfied ourselves, but also communicated to the community that we'd done that review, and that there were even some areas that we thought we needed to make some progress in, and it's reflected in our legislative policy manual of where we're looking for some tools from the state to be able to go and do that. But by and large, I think that the Transportation Benefit District while it was the initiative, I think voters were primarily looking at what happened with Sound Transit. I think that we can make and review shows that we can make a good case that our $20 car tab is actually almost immediately impactful locally and is of a great benefit to the citizens of our community to be able to go and do that. When we formed the Transportation Benefit District, we actually formed it and then waited for over a year before we funded it with car tabs, expressly for the reason that we wanted to make sure that we were going to do it in a way that was actually going to not just be gathering revenue and then deciding how we're going to spend it, but setting some parameters about how we were going to spend it to do that. And I think we did a really good job of where we looked at primarily, we're looking at Transportation Benefit District revenue to do things that the community needed that really couldn't wait or were unlikely to be eligible for grant funding or something else. And so the data provided to us this evening with a historical list of projects, I think validates our intent, and I think validates a decision on our part to move forward, given the actions of the Supreme Court, to continue to collect the $20 car tabs as being beneficial to the community. I do think one other thing, though, that we perhaps should do is that every year there is an annual Transportation Benefit District report that is prepared, and we had fallen into it being something that's very routine, comes before us in a consent agenda, and we don't really discuss it. And this may be a year, given what has happened with the initiative and the Supreme Court ruling, for that report to be a little bit more robust and include the history that actually is what's documented in our packet tonight. So as some way that we're being really transparent in a consensus to move forward with continuing to collect the car tabs. And I would think that would be well received by the community and maybe be somewhat preemptive to questions going from the public going forward. So that's kind of my thoughts on it, and that includes my reasons for wanting to have this discussion earlier rather than waiting until February.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from council? All right. Then we will move to Mr. Caulfield's reports by the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to report on a handful of items, if I might. The first, you might remember back in June, we reported that Congress had made available through their CARES Act recovery program $1.5 billion to the Federal Economic Development Administration nationwide. And of that 1.5 billion, 266 million has been allocated to the Seattle EDA district, if you will, here in the Pacific Northwest, which of course would include Lakewood. The purpose of the funds is to support infrastructure projects in support of job retention and expansion. So we have subsequently, actually our Public Works Engineering Department has been having, as well as our Economic Development team, have been having conversations with the EDA on projects here in Lakewood that we could apply for. And by the way, there's no limit on the number of projects. Again, they just need to meet the criteria of supporting job retention and expansion. We had identified 6 projects. I am pleased to announce that earlier today, after much work, including, by the way, working with the Puget Sound Regional Council and getting their feedback and input, we hit the send button for a grant request totaling about $3.1 million in support of Custer Road from essentially Bridgeport up to 75th, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, streetlights, that whole corridor in there that's in dire need of some reinvestment, but is also a key business district in the city. So we have submitted that. Other projects that we're looking at are 2 in the Woodbrook area, 150th and 146, given all the light industrial manufacturing investment that's occurring. We're also looking at some downtown roads, particularly the traffic signal at Avondale and Gravely Lake Drive. And by the way, the advice that we had gotten from the EDA is, you know, projects in the $1 to $3 million range are kind of the sweet spot that they think would, you know, work well for Lakewood. We're also looking at 100th from Lakeview up to South Tacoma Way, or South Tacoma Way down to Lakeview where the railroad tracks are. You know, it's a key entrance into our town center area. And then the last, another traffic signal at Steilacoom and in Durango over in the northeast part of the city. So those are some of the projects that we're looking at, and we have again the Public Works Engineering Department taking the lead on that. So probably more to follow on some additional grants that we'll be seeking there. Wanted to also report that the Western State Hospital, our community partnership program, our request for $621,000. I just want to summarize that DSHS has confirmed that they have proposed that in their baseline budget. It's not called out specifically as a line item, meaning that unlikely that we're going to have our state legislators advocate for that funding. However, we are doing our due diligence and requesting specific written verification from DSHS that is in fact the case, and we expect to have that shortly. And once we do, we'll share that. We'll share that with you. The only risk that we see with that funding being included in the whole DSHS baseline budget is that if the state legislature, you know, decides to make some kind of a wholesale, you know, cut across the board, does that mean that our program costs are a part of that? And that's one of the things that we're seeking verification from DSHS, that if that was to occur, that our program would not be subject to that. I think as I've been keeping you updated, there is a proposed enhanced services facility. The latest update that I have is they had their neighborhood meeting last Wednesday. It was a Zoom meeting, and so it was videotaped. And our city clerk did download that 30-minute neighborhood meeting to your iPads. So if you have an opportunity, I would suggest that you take a look at that. Now that they have done that, we are expecting that they will make a formal application for the project to the city. We will then go through the review process, including seeking advice and feedback from St. Clair Hospital, our police department, fire department. In addition, we'll be reviewing activity at other ESFs in the state to see if there are any issues or problems that came up during their application or during their current operations. And that will be included in the city's report to the hearing examiner. Ultimately, it will be the city's hearing examiner who will make the decision on the conditional use permit. And again, the proposed site is along Pacific Highway between Lakewood Ford and where the new Wood Spring Suites is going in. And by the way, both of those businesses have expressed concern with this facility going in. And so that's part of the record as well. Last week, I also reported that Sound Transit was looking at doing some testing along that rail line on November 14th and 15th. I had a chance to speak with them late last week. And long story short, they are not going to be doing that. in 2020. The soonest that they would get back to that would be sometime in 2021. Also last week, I had a kind of a lengthy conversation with the Sound Transit CEO on a number of issues. And one of the items that we had requested in the past was, hey, can you just slow the train down? Does it have to be 79 miles an hour? Could it be 59? Could it be 60? Could it be a reasonable speed given we've got 7 or 8 at-grade crossings and residences and businesses and a school and a hospital nearby? Long story short, the Sound Transit CEO has committed to looking at that and doing what he can on his end. But he also explained to me that there are agreements in place with the FRA, Amtrak, and of course, WashDOT Rail as conditions of why they got this money. So that's a bit of an obstacle. But we also had a discussion along the lines of, are they really going to object that the speed limit be reduced by 20 miles an hour for whatever the length of that corridor is? I mean, is that really going to, have an impact on the overall intent of what they received the funds for, which is to try and speed up the movement of passengers through that corridor? So I'm very pleased that the Sound Transit CEO, Peter Rogoff, is doing this. And again, as he pointed out, no guarantees, but he's going to try and do what he can do on his end. And we'll continue to work collaboratively with him and the other partners there. So the holiday season is coming up. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do some of our public events, including our Christmas tree lighting event, as well as, the nice parade that we've had the last few years. So we're going to be doing an online event and reverse parade and all of that. However, in advance of that, what we'd like to do is we'd like to schedule some time, probably the latter part of November. First and foremost, we need to film the mayor flipping the switch, if you will, on the tree lighting so that we have that, as well as the mayor saying some words. And then likewise, we would like to have the rest of the council have an opportunity to say some words as well. And so we'd like to schedule that probably sometime in the latter part of November. So I would ask that you start thinking about that, and we'll reach out to you individually to schedule a time if that's okay. The other option is to do it over Zoom as part of a meeting, but I don't think that's the same as maybe sitting you down in a chair and taking a video of you if you're okay with that. So I just wanted to, again, plant the seed for you on that. And then plus you'll have an opportunity to, put on your favorite, holiday sweater and your Santa hat and stuff like that.
I think they should carol while I flip the switch.
So I'll leave that for council comments, Mayor.
You're both nuts.
Yeah, there we go. Grinch had to show up. There we go, right there, didn't we? Scrooge. Yeah. Wanted to report on Mary Dodsworth and Sally Martinez and their whole team did an absolutely fantastic job on the farmers market. Earlier this evening, I forwarded a synopsis report that Ms. Dodsworth put together. And over the last 17 weeks, they had a phenomenal farmers market, not just in terms of the fact that sales increased, almost doubled from last year, but it was so well received by the public as well as our vendors. So if you have a chance, if you read anything I send you today, I would suggest you read that. She did a fantastic job, and I just want to tip my hat again to her and Sally and their whole team there for pulling that off, particularly in the middle of a pandemic. The Commercial Aviation Coordinating Commission, or CACC, met last week. If you recall, this is a commission that was appointed by the state legislature to look at identifying another airport for primarily passenger travel, even freight, commercial freight, here in the Puget Sound region somewhere between the Marysville and Centralia area. And they have identified 6 airports for expansion or a new airport. One is up in Arlington, Bremerton over in Kitsap County, Everett and Painfield, where actually there already is passenger air traffic already occurring. down in Shelton, Sanderson Field, Pierce County's Tacoma Narrows Field over in the Gig Harbor area, and then lastly, way down south, down in Toledo. The good news is that McCord Field at JBLM is not on that list, was not added to that list, and did not come up in the meeting as a point of discussion as we thought it would based on their last meeting. And I have to think that the letter that the city sent under the mayor's signature had some impact on that, and in pointing out a number of reasons why McCord Field at JBLM will not work. And so at this point in time, we're going to continue to monitor the process. They are expected to have a report out in February of 2021. So we look forward to seeing that. One of the key requirements that the state legislature provided the CACC is that whatever airport they choose to provide for this expansion has to have a sponsor and or the support of the community. So that's one of the key issues. And of course, McCord Field and JBLM did not have that. And so with that, I believe that's what I got. That's my report, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Caulfield, Mr. Brandstetter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Caulfield, with the information about how DSHS is looking to fund our community policing program, and if we verify that that actually is going to be in their base budget, does that speak to us perhaps amending our legislative priorities, making room for a new priority, or at least removing this one?
So Councilmember Brandstetter, we actually have had a brief discussion this afternoon on that. And right now it's just too early to tell. I think it will depend on, what type of verification and validation we get from DSHS. But it just depends at this point in time. I think it's too early to tell.
Okay. Well, again, if the opportunity exists to expend our effort on another need because this one isn't something we need the legislature to take on, I guess I'm glad we're considering that. Regarding the Christmas tree and things like that, would it be possible if council members were doing their tape videos with family, to make so that those snippets would be not just a council member, but a council member in family, if that would be allowable, if you could consider that. And I was also wondering, have you designated who the Grinch is yet?
I think that was pretty apparent a little bit ago, Councilmember Brandstetter, though I do want to tell you, I have a history. I love the Grinch. He's my favorite. But I was usurped. Am I saying that word correctly, Councilmember Simpson?
It
So
said,
once, yes.
it said Boston.
Well, if according to your report, the Grinch is going to get equal face time with a council member. So
Hey,
Yeah.
city manager, I'm willing to share FaceTime on that Grinch thing with the city manager if he's game.
Yeah. Look at Councilmember Simpson wearing his hot gear from back in the day. We had to have special permission to wear that.
All right, thank you. That's all I need, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Caulfield? All right, then we'll go to council comments. Ms. Moss.
Oh,
You got a
real
question?
quick, I just had a comment for the city manager. And when we were talking about the speed of the train through Lakewood, and I don't know what Mr. Rogoff can do, but the threat of a lawsuit against if something happens, who is going to pay the cost? That's one of the things that, the family is going to pay the cost of the loss or whatever, but is there anything in that arena that we can maybe pull together to help support our cause?
So Councilmember Moss, I would hope that the incident that occurred in December of 2017 is enough to warrant FRA and Amtrak and WashDOT Rail to realize that maybe they need to slow it down. Matter of fact, they have made changes that as they approach that curve and that part of the rail line, they are going to slow down and make sure that, you know, their people, that their train engineers are properly schooled in that. But again, there's really no need for them to come screaming through Lakewood at 79 miles an hour. And I will say this, I think Mr. Rogoff completely understands where we're coming from and is really stepping up to the plate and trying to help us out here.
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to see something done if possible. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will just report that I attended the school board meeting tonight, and I had an opportunity to share with them some of the upcoming events, mainly the fall cleanup. There was no questions, but a lot of comments were made that they appreciated the way it was handled, how organized it was, how easy it was to get through the line and everything. And they're looking forward to more of that this coming fall. They're looking forward to the dates, and I gave them the dates and times. So they'll be out there ready and waiting with all their goodies. So thank you very much. Just wanted to pass that along.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a chance this afternoon to participate in the virtual version of AWC's Cities on Tap, which is their series of meetings that they have with council members and mayors and folks around the state. That sort of is a rollout of the AWC's legislative agenda and priorities that was going on, and a little bit about what AWC hopes to accomplish. In terms of the priorities, there wasn't anything that was significantly revealing over what they had previously, and the city manager had provided to us, other than that they saw that in the areas of housing that the previous legislative sessions had focused on homelessness and affordable housing, and that they think that the issue of housing is going to expand to mitigating COVID impacts on people being housed, which is, I think, consistent with the draft letter that the mayor shared with us. So that was a good thing to do that. The other thing that they noted is that the legislature is making plans to essentially hold the first months anyway of the session virtually, with little opportunities to make in-person testimony at committees. And at least with respect to the Senate, they were going to look to limit each senator to a finite number of bills that they could introduce, which for us, with respect to Senator O'Ban, who has introduced multiple bills on our behalf in past years around the area of adult family homes and of county fair share items, is not necessarily good news. And for Senator Conway, who has really done some good work for us in terms of economic development and as a supporter of some variation of tax increment financing, and has been an introducer of a bill previously, that we may want to look to do that. some of the other cities that shared, and there was still encouragement to try to engage with your legislators as soon after the election when you know who they are, to brief them about your priorities. It was interesting. We've always sought to have a meeting where we all sat down together and discussed that. And some of the other cities indicated that they had already looked at having such meetings over Zoom, and that they actually found that the participation of legislators was both getting more legislators to participate, but also to getting them more talkative and of doing that. And so, you know, we should be looking for something latter part of November or early December that, and not be concerned that it might be virtual, in that the legislators are zooming up to be able to do much of their work by that way, and would probably welcome the chance to get together and interact with us. That's all that I have, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Mr. Simpson,
No comment, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Bulkey,
No comments tonight, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Farmer.
Good. I was going to try and beat Boki to the punch by raving about the Onyx project and the Veterans Drive project. I'm just going to channel him from last week. They're so amazing. They're absolutely amazing. I was driving slowly through and just taking it all in. It's really going to change the character of those neighborhoods for the better. It's just, they're amazing. So fantastic job, Public Works Department and contractors. I wanted to give a shout out on the farmers markets. I know that we have, again, with the raving, we have talked about that in the past, but I just another shout out to the parks team, to Mary and her crew. It was really special this year for a lot of reasons. For me personally, to be able to participate in that. And I very much remember my husband rolling his eyes saying, oh, we have to go to the farmer's market because you're on the council. And then he got there and there were several food vendors that he'd never seen before, which he immediately took a liking to. And every Friday it was like, we're going to the farmer's market for dinner, aren't we? Where I would pick up then my weekly flower haul and fresh vegetables and that sort of thing. So it was in a time where we're limited in doing a lot of things, it really made our time so much better. So thank you. I did drive the new overpass this weekend, kind of on the food theme. We love Popeyes over in Tillicum. And so we're always kind of, trying to meander down the side streets, but that new overpass was open and I'm like, hey, we need to go try that out. And again, fantastic. Great job, WashDOT. And all the coordination that the city did. And last, I have a sex offender policy board meeting on Thursday where we will be talking about our final report to the legislature. That's it for me.
Thank you. Mr. Whalen.
As you can imagine, it's been really quiet this week. Nothing much going on. But I did have a chance to attend the Economic Development Board's annual retreat, in which we discussed some great topics there in the formulation of our work plan, and part and parcel of the EDB's work plan is a recognition of the need to have more diversity, inclusion, and participation by minority-owned businesses in our community, which I thought was just, again, a great opportunity to have a good engaged discussion in that. So more to follow on that, including some of the topics we talked about tonight with regard to the business community, hopefully supporting in a financial way some of the workforce development at the local level with the community and technical colleges. So there needs to be some detail put to bear on that, but I think there's some opportunities there. So that's it, just kind of a crazy week. I look forward to seeing you all next Monday.
Thank you. On Thursday, I participated in the Chamber's Military Affairs Committee meeting. It was pretty well attended. Colonel Sky Duncan, Garrison Commander, was the main presenter. People asked questions about Lakewood's interface with the base, and I nearly didn't run out of things to mention because there's so many. Regarding that housing letter, I know we got a couple of comments back. Can't really do any editing as far as the composition goes, as opposed to agreeing with the subject or not, given that there are something like 13 jurisdictions that have been asked to sign off. And to Mr. Whalen's suggestion that we add something, other things aren't precluded, but again, that was kind of a consensus deal. It gets to lowest common denominator kind of things. And sometimes somebody has a question about one and it gets left out, but that doesn't mean that that isn't an important thing for the group. So given the lack of substantive disagreement, I'm going to go ahead and sign that. And then I have it on a very informed source with respect to CARES Act funding and what's going to happen at the federal government. And the insider knowledge on that is that if the Democrats take the Senate, nothing will happen until January. And that there will be a very large next tranche, which will include aid to state and local governments. If the Republicans retain the Senate, there's likely to be an almost immediate bill through Congress that's much smaller, something maybe in the $50 billion range, and more time to spend CARES Act money, but not more money for states and local governments. So those seem to make sense for me. We'll see how good that inside prognostication is within the next weeks and months. Is there anything further to come before council at this point?
No, Mayor, not on my end.
Right. Then we will recess into executive session for approximately 30 minutes, at least in the first segment, pursuant to RCW 4231.10.1G to review the performance of a public employee. The council is not expected to take final action following the executive session. Council, please exit and enter the private Zoom meeting. We're in recess.
Great, thank you. Oh, let's see.
I'm back. We're extending for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Get my 10-minute timer going here. Hold on a second. You there, Vienna?
I am.
We're adjourned.
Thank you, Mayor.